So hello, everyone. Thank you guys for joining us today. We so appreciate you taking the time to be with us here on this webinar. We'll get started in just a few moments. I do have a couple of housekeeping things I want to run through first, but welcome to today's webinar, Content Glow Up, taking your content from ho-hum to fabulous. I'm Kelsey. I'm a demand gen manager here at Acton. So this topic is super relevant to me. So I'm very excited to hear what these two have in store for us. But before we get into it, real quick, this webinar is being recorded. We will be sending out the on-demand recording within a couple of business days, as well as the slides. So keep an eye out on your email for that. Share it with your peers. If you do need to jump early, no worries. You will be getting that recording. Additionally, we have enabled the chat, so feel free to use that throughout the presentation. Let me know it's working. Tell me where you're joining from. And we also have a Q&A box. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, we will be doing a brief Q&A afterwards. So drop those into the Q&A as well, and I will get those over to our presenters to answer. Lastly, there will be a short survey at the end of this webinar. We'd appreciate it if you could fill that out for us. It's just a few questions, shouldn't take more than a minute, but it helps us create better content for you guys moving forward. So please, if you have the time, fill out that survey. So as I said, we got a great presentation for you today. I'm joined by two of our creative marketers here at Acton. We have Matt Saylor, Senior Content Marketing Manager, and Trevan Strean, Creative Director here at Acton. We have a great presentation. And so with that, Matt, why don't you kick us off?
Let's do it. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate your time, and I'm excited to talk through this with you. Let's just go through a quick agenda. So we're going to have a quick intro on why repurpose content. I think the real question is why not? And so we'll cover that just briefly before getting into kind of a longer case study that we're going to do on Acton's blog and talk about how we approached an audit and refresh of close to 2,000 blogs. And we're still very much in the process of it. And then third, I will hand it off to Trevan, and he will talk through branding, how to balance rebranding versus refreshing, and when to make the decision to do one or the other. So I think it should be a really interesting presentation. So here's our first section, the why. Why repurpose old content when I could be creating something new? Well, I think there's a few reasons. So I think, first of all, the big reason, not everyone saw it the first time, right? Even if you have, really good click-through rates in your emails and posts or really great organic traffic, you worked really hard on content that doesn't need to be one and done. Your target market is still full of people who missed it the first time and for whom it's still relevant, right? Secondly, think about the amount of time and effort it takes to get the information you need from your internal stakeholders, from SMEs, maybe sometimes you're interviewing external people to your company. Their time's incredibly valuable, engineering, product, sales, whoever it might be. And it's also, you might know, depending on if you've kind of gone through this process, it can be hard to get that time, and you really want to make the most of that, right? You don't want to have to be going back to that well and re-engage in that complicated process every single time you want to make content. So that's another good reason to go back to that well of the content you have made and freshen it up. And then third, we're all hearing this refrain in marketing right now, I think, of do more with less. That's kind of the era we're in as marketers, right? Budgets are shrinking, but expectations are rising. We're all under pressure to kind of 10x what we can do with tools like AI and things like that. Which brings me to my fourth point, right? The opportunity to use AI tools. There's a lot of great tools out there that can help you with some of this work now. I think how much help you can get depends a little bit on what you need and what your expectations are. But there's definitely some ways you can, simplify and shorten that production process with tools like ChatGPT and others that we'll talk about a little later in the program. So that's why to do it. Pulled a few stats that I think are interesting. This is from an SEMrush State of Content Marketing report that they did, where they surveyed a bunch of content marketers. I think it's pretty recent, from the last couple of years. And so 42% of content marketers reported having successful results from repurposing content. I think that's a great stat. I think it's interesting. I would actually have guessed it might be higher. But the way it was asked, maybe if 100% hadn't actually done that kind of repurposing, maybe they weren't able to, report any success. I still think 42 is pretty impressive. Almost half are reporting having seen good results from that. And then this is from that same report. It's an average 4 hours average time it takes to create a single blog article. I actually think for some of you, I know for me, it's a little longer. I'd say it's closer to 6 to 8 for copy. And then if you count in design, like there's maybe even more time. But that is a good average. And so if you sort of compare that to refreshing your content, which I think takes, some of the blogs that we've refreshed, it's taken, only an hour or two to do the refresh. And so multiply that, right, by 10 blogs, 20 blogs, 100 blogs. You get to a point where you can save like hours, days, and weeks of time with this kind of a refresh approach. So I think you're all persuaded. If you're here, you see the value in it. So let's kind of get down to what it actually takes to do this kind of a process. I have an 8-step process that I have laid out here for when you want to do a full audit and refresh of content, right? I think, there's little pieces you can do in at any time, but if you're doing a major kind of audit or refresh, this is the process that I would recommend. So first, set the goals and benchmarks. What do you want to achieve, right? What do you want to show your bosses to prove that this was successful? I'm a big proponent of, if you can't measure it, don't do it. And so I think you want to have those goals and benchmarks set up ahead of time. And then you'll want to create the tools and documents that you need. You'll probably want some form of spreadsheet. Maybe you have a checklist for your updates. So the things you want to make sure you're updating on every blog or piece of content. I think you want to make this as automated in the old-fashioned sense as you can, in terms of, get a spreadsheet together, set all that up at the beginning so that once it comes time to execute, you're, just humming along. Third is assembling a team. Who is that going to be? Who's going to be able to help you? This is a lot of work. It can be a big task. So, where can you rely on your current team and outside experts to help? And then, 4 is pretty self-explanatory, although it's kind of the bulk of it is like doing the actual audit and evaluation of that old content to draw those conclusions about what you're going to change, which would bring you to then creating a strategy. A strategy is not a 4-letter word. It doesn't have to be scary. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then you're going to want to schedule all that out. So once you have a plan for updating it, when are you going to actually release and roll things out? It might be that it's going to take you. We audited our content back in May, and we're still doing a lot of that refresh work. We paced it out over the time that it made sense to do it, while making other content net new on at the same time. And then actually make those changes, follow that schedule. And then finally, report on the success. Like I said, if you can't measure it, don't do it. So find ways to report out the results of what you've done to show the value of it. Before we get deep into the case study, we have a poll. So I'm curious, to see what your experiences are with this. Is repurposing content part of your content marketing strategy right now? So either yes, no, but we plan to start, or no, and we don't have plans to start. If it's that one, I'm not sure why you're here, but welcome anyway. So get your answers in. And we have some results. Awesome. So looks like 68% of you have this as part of your strategy, which is awesome. 21% said no, but you plan to start, and 11% said no, and you don't have plans to start. That's okay. Maybe you need kind of this webinar to kind of give you some talking points to kind of go to your leadership and make those plans happen. Interesting. Cool. Yeah. So I think this is a great thing to do. And so let's get into this and talk through how Act-On did our blog audit. I'm really going to treat this as a kind of a long form case study and go into a little depth with you and share some learnings along the way. Our blog, it's really interesting, had been around, the Act-On blog had been around, I think, since 2007. I earlier said 2009. I think it actually goes back to 2007. Anyway, a long time. And when we set on this audit, I'm new to Act-On as of the beginning of this year. So a lot of that history happened, without my participation. And so we knew we were going to find some interesting stuff. In some cases, we found some strange stuff. I'll highlight some of that coming up. But we actually defined a scope, right? So we have close to 2,000 blogs on the website. And so we picked a chunk of that to audit, right? So we chose to audit the ones that had a certain amount of traffic. Our goal was to improve the SEO and the experience. And so using those blogs that were getting traffic already helped us, get more bang for our buck. And to be honest, there are still blogs that we are not going to update, but they're not getting traffic, and no harm, no foul. So step one, your goals and benchmarks. We set out to increase our top 10 keyword rankings for each blog. We set out to increase our organic traffic from updated blogs. And we set out, this is a soft goal, but an important one, we set out to create a clear journey flow for every blog on the site. So, our site had been updated a lot over the years, and in some cases, some of those older blogs might have still had pretty good content, but didn't necessarily have a place for people to go to learn more or continue that journey. And so, I'll be really transparent here. I did not set firm numeric goals for my KPIs here. And part of it's a little bit of a long story as to why. I was lucky. I set these goals. I knew I wanted to increase them, but we didn't necessarily, based on some data issues on our side, have a clear benchmark set for what the traffic had been. So in any event, these are the goals we set. And so, you might consider goals like this if SEO is what you're looking at, if you're, but set different goals depending on what kind of content you're auditing. So, if it's sales assistance content, it might be getting a certain number of meetings or demo bookings. If you're auditing landing pages, maybe it's conversions that you want to look at. Match those goals and benchmarks to what you're actually, the type of content you're doing and the goals that you have. And you can have non-numeric goals like the one we have of clarifying the customer journey. I think that's definitely in bounds, particularly if it's alongside some more hard data goals. But I think whatever it is, be clear about those goals from the start and stack the deck for yourself, to the extent you can, design this audit and update to make sure you're hitting those goals, right? And so I have a kind of an ugly screenshot of my ugly spreadsheet that I used for this. Ugly, but very useful, I'll say. I made this spreadsheet, and I'll walk you through a little bit of what I did. So I pulled all the blog traffic data, all the engagement data that I wanted from Google Analytics, from GA4. And I think I did the previous 6 or 9 months. I'd have to check. I don't actually recall what the time period I chose was, but I did choose that specific time period. And a lot of that's what you see on the left-hand side of the table, the views, users, conversion events, things like that. And then the right half, starting with that categorization, column J, that's the stuff we filled in during the audit, right? And so, I always recommend having an open notes field, as you see here, although don't rely too much on it. I'm big on categorization, right? Like, you need to break up the work that will come out of this audit somehow. And so what are those main categories that you can sort everything into, so that it's not all just, long form notes that you're relying on for that, right? So in our case, we used, we had 4 categories. We had update, improve, keep, and retire. The update, improve distinction being update was more just topical things, and improve was more if we felt the voice and the tone of the content and things like that also needed addressing. We also had some fields here related to keywords and things like that, and some of the blog tags, so that we can clean up our metadata. And then it's cut off here, but I always recommend having some yes, no fields. So we had a few, like, does this need new images? Yes, no. A few things like that. Anytime you can have a yes or no question as opposed to an open field can help you kind of streamline the process. So as you're, I think I'm going to share a template of that as a follow-on to this program. So look for that in your email. I think based on whatever you're doing, though, you're probably going to want to create something of your own, or at least heavily modify a template that you find. And so I have a few questions here that I think you want to ask yourself. So for instance, how far back are you going to go with this library? Are you doing the whole scope of it or not? Are there clear kind of eras in your content library that you can make generalizations about? Like, for instance, oh, we had, that brand up until, 2015, and then we went to this brand. So then, that would inform what you're doing. What design and technical issues do you expect to come up? We had a very specific thing happening in ours with WordPress where we had this one module that kind of broke for some of the older blogs. And so we had we knew that would come up. And so we noted those as we went, for instance. What are the sort of tone and voice, topicality, what considerations are you keeping in mind here? And then what data can you collect to inform that audit before it begins? In this case, since it was blogs and on the web, it was, SEO stuff and traffic data. Again, who will be helping with this audit? So you want to set up a tool that is matching with their level of experience, right? So I had a great freelancer help me with this, who has a lot of experience in content and SEO. And so I was able to, sort of have a spreadsheet that needed a little bit of sophistication to fill out. But if you're working with people who maybe don't have that experience, you could sort of adjust the queries in your spreadsheet based on, what their experience level is, right? So make them a little more yes, no, multiple choice. Again, I recommend categories, sort all this stuff into a few categories based on what you're going to do with it and what amount of work it will take to do that. That was our update and improve distinction. Structural or metadata issues are good to consider. And then again, anytime you can make it yes, no, or multiple choice. So that's step 2. Step 3 is assembling your team. I nodded to this a little bit on the last slide, but think about who you can, tap to help you with this. If you have freelancers or creative team members who can help out, that's always great. But also think about, like, do you have interns or junior team members who want to expand their experience maybe into content, or they're doing some things with content but want to expand, what they do. Maybe you have an agency with some hours that you can throw at this. I think it's also great to get, to the extent they're available and have time, marketing team members from other disciplines to help. Really, anyone with time and intelligence can help you with this. And I think as long as you set this up in a way that they're going to be able to fill out that spreadsheet and do that audit easily, you're going to be in good shape. And the fun part is the audit. Some of you might not agree. I thought it was really fun. I really actually enjoyed going through sort of this long history of Act-On's blogs. So I have an example blog on the screen here that Trevan might recognize from some of our investigations. We started calling it content archaeology, and that's what the corny headshot with me and the Indiana Jones fedora is. We actually did a social post where we called me Illinois Smith, and we kind of referenced the fact that we had been unearthing kind of old blogs. But so yeah, it's kind of interesting. So if you see the blog here, it's about holidays, which isn't really connected in any way to marketing automation, but I think it goes back to when this blog started. If you think about, I don't know how many of you in the audience might have been around for kind of the early days of blogging. Blogs were really different. Blogs were more of a destination back then in the early days. And I was back there, so I remember it. And you'd have your list of blogs that you liked, and you'd actually go every day and check them. It seems weird now because we have social media. We just kind of, click along to whatever, is being recommended there. We might have a few sites that we're checking, but and in fact, our blog now almost all the traffic is from organic search. And so content like this, while it made sense at the time for, the blogger to think, well, it's Christmas Eve, I got to post something, I guess I'll make it about holidays. You can kind of see how they would kind of do that. But today it just isn't working for us. So our blog now is an organic traffic magnet. That's a very different way of interacting with content. You really need a specific search query. But what's interesting is that in our case, because our blog had been around for so long, it actually built up a lot of search authority over time. In some cases for things we didn't want or need it to. A good example is that we were the #1 keyword position for what's the story of the Star Spangled Banner at one point. We had a lot of stuff like that just because it was still online, and whoever managed this blog back then did a good job. The content was good, but it just wasn't related to sort of our offer. And so anyway, we found some really interesting things as we went into that audit. And so I think as you look at your own, think about how you might use the stuff that even doesn't seem like you would use it. Like I said, we did a social post. We have this webinar we're doing where we're kind of talking about some of the strange blogs that we discovered. Think about how you might work with some of that stuff. And then once you do the audit, which will take some time, for everybody to go through all those fields in the spreadsheet and do the work. You need a strategy. So, think about the trends and high-level conclusions that you can draw. I went into this a bit on the previous slide talking about SEO, but our strategy was really to dump a lot of the old destination content and redirect it, and really focus on improving and buttressing the content that was either built for SEO or that we could modify to make it fit SEO. And that's led to some interesting unintended consequences, actually. Our average keyword ranking, for instance, has gone way up. Our average position has gone up, and our click-through rates have improved. All those things are really good. Our total keywords have kind of plummeted. They're kind of picking back up now, but because we were running away right from those keywords of what's the Star Spangled Banner, or like we had posts related. We had a lot of holiday posts, right? We actually had a post that was just the full text of an O. Henry Christmas short story. So a lot of those things had ranked over time. And so, the reason I bring this up, use this strategy to manage your stakeholder expectations, right? So I was a little nervous when I saw, okay, we're going to have to deprecate a lot of this content, that people would, that some of my stakeholders would get a little nervous about those total keywords falling, right? So I was very explicit in my strategy about the fact that, yeah, overall keywords might fall. What we're working on is, position 1s through 10. We're working on click-through rates. We're working on those things and driving those things up, even if the overall keywords go down, right? So how can you build a strategy that can, account for some of those things that might change as you start to update your content? And then schedule the updates. This is a big part of it, right? How are you going to get all that work done now that you've identified in the audit and through the strategy the things that you're going to change? I think for me, the learning that I would give you from experience is setting a schedule you can stick to and follow through on is better than a more aggressive schedule and then missing all your deadlines and goals, right? So set up a schedule that you can meet, rather than getting ahead of your skis, right? And kind of over promising and under delivering. I think if you've ever had that kind of experience, you know how that can go. And then, don't burn money. Let your resources determine the speed and extent of your updates, right? So a lot of these I've been working with freelancers. I have a great little stable of freelancers that I use, and I've put a lot of this content on them, and they've done a great job. It's been a great way, so that I can then kind of focus on higher level strategy, creating new content while they're helping me refresh that stuff. And then, we'll get more into this when Trevan takes over, but how is design going to come into play with this stuff? So with the blog, we were mostly focusing on content, and design was, kind of happening in parallel as we were refreshing the rest of our website. But for instance, if you're doing outdated ebooks that you're going to audit and refresh, that design process, right, is going to be a significant, investment. Is there coding and development stuff that's going to have to be done to accomplish what you're auditing? Again, in our audit, we kind of set it up so that there wasn't necessarily. There are some things we kind of uncovered that we're fixing as part of our ongoing web process. But anyway, those are some things to think about as you're kind of scheduling these updates out. And when it really gets interesting is when you start to make the updates. You start to actually put that content out there. And so here, as I said, I made use of my awesome freelancers. And I also had some AI tools that I was able to leverage to help. And some of those I can recommend. I used SEMrush's SEO writing assistant. I'm not sure, if you're in the audience and you've used that. It's a really cool program, and it actually has a WordPress plugin. We use WordPress for our site, and so I can make a lot of those changes right in the environment. What it does is it kind of gives you a score. You put your content in there, and it gives you a score on your SEO and keywords, your originality, your tone, and then your readability. And so it kind of gives you prompts that you can pull those different levers. You can click on a section that it's highlighted and ask it to expand on that. So give you more content on it. And you can, it can give you tips on making it more readable. So trimming down long sentences and things like that. Really, really great tool that I recommend a lot. I think to some extent, I also use ChatGPT for some of this. I think the reason I liked that SEMrush tool more than ChatGPT is because it sort of puts more of a structure around its recommendations. You can definitely put a blog into ChatGPT and say, hey, make this better. But you're going to have to really engineer those prompts to do so. In fact, what I like to do with ChatGPT is I like to give it a sample of what I want the writing to sound like, a short one, and then give it my prompt. This is a good tip that I found really helpful, because in my early experiments with it, I often found it's not quite getting what I'm asking for it in my query. If you give it an example and then say hey, match the rest of these topics to this, it can then in my experience perform a lot better. And so that's what I'd recommend. So as far as the slide, you can see I got from the Wayback Machine kind of the old state of the blog. And just a few things to point out, that stock photo, the less said about that, the better. Not a great one. The list here, this was kind of a listicle format, needed SEO optimization. So you see the list there, but there weren't H2 tags with all those things to kind of get that rich, give those layers to the social readers. And then in the sidebar, you won't know this until we get to Trevan's presentation, but those are out of brand. That's an older brand. And so we'll click to the after, ta-da. And actually, it'll continue to evolve from this because we're actually now working on updates to our entire blog experience. But in terms of this, we have a better stock photo now. A human, not just some words on a keyboard. We have our SEO headlines and metadata structure in place, and then our visuals on the side are matching our branding and showing our more recent stuff. So, I think if you toggle between those two, it's a lot better. And I'll say, step 8 is reporting on the success. And so I picked a representative blog for this, which is this one, in fact. I could give you results for everything, but we're actually still doing it. And so I thought it would be better to just pick kind of a representative example. So in this case, we had a 212% increase in our top 10 keyword rankings. We had a 91% increase in organic traffic from updated, that should just say blog, not blogs. So not all of them performed that well. I wish, that'd be great, but not all of them. And then creating that clear journey flow, that's more of a checkbox, not really a percentage, but we have been doing that with everything we've been updating. And so, I think to get a little deeper into what our results were like, I think we had kind of two categories of results here, roughly. There were some that performed like this and did just gangbusters because we had more better keywords, more traffic then came in, click-through rates improved because people were seeing something closer to what they expected from their search. And then, frankly, there were a chunk of them that didn't didn't quite perform this way. They kind of were flat and kind of stayed flat. And so, I continued to, among my team, as we do more, I continue to share these kind of stats out and be really transparent about that. The ones that worked and the ones that didn't. I think it's, it's pretty normal and expected that you're going to have that kind of thing. Not everyone is going to be a blockbuster, but you'll find those ones that really work for you that show that result. And so, a parting thought from me before I hand off to Trevan is just don't boil the ocean. That's a cliche, but I think it's a applicable one. Pick a vertical of your content, pick a section. We did blog, go into an audit with a clear objective. In our case, it was improving SEO, and make sure you have a process in place that along every step in the way will help you meet those goals. And I think if you take that general approach, you can apply that to pretty much any kind of content, just kind of adjusting. So blogs, ebooks, training materials, whatever you have a backlog of that's worth, making a little bit better and seeing a little bit better results. So with that, I will hand it over to Trevan, and he's going to talk about rebranding and refreshing.
Thanks, Matt. So to kick this one off, I think we have a poll, first of all, to just get a sense for whether or not any of you have done a rebrand recently, or if you're considering it in the future, and even if you don't think you need to. I've been at organizations where all of these were the correct answer in different scenarios. So there is no right or wrong. It's more of a function of what your goals are and what is your strategy. So we'll give people a minute to pop their votes into this poll, and then we'll get started. Cool. So all over the map on this one, 41% in the last year. That's a lot. So you're probably gonna not need as much from this section. But those of you considering it, and those of you that think we might need to, or maybe even those of you from over a year ago, some of this stuff could become relevant to you in the future. Next slide. Next slide, Matt. So first of all, what is the difference between a rebrand and a refresh? When you rebrand, you're completely overhauling your identity and your strategy. You can have a new mission, new vision, new messaging, new visual identity. Essentially, what you're going to come out of at the end with is a new company. You're going to fundamentally be a different organization than you were before. On the other hand, with a refresh, it's going to be more of an update. Like, we want to maintain the core of what our company is and what we're driving toward, but maybe our messaging has become a little stale, or our visuals are just outdated. And so you're going to want to retain some of that previous recognition in an update. It goes without saying that a rebrand is usually far more effort, usually expensive, and takes quite a lot of time, versus a refresh, which can also take a lot of time, as we know with projects, but usually a little less effort and almost definitely less expensive. Next slide. So I've bucketed my reasons for why you should do a rebrand into 3 primary blocks. The first one, internal shift. You've outgrown your existing strategy. Maybe you're expanding into a new market, or a new product line is launching. Maybe you've had a change of leadership, and that new leader wants to take the company in a different direction. Those are all good reasons for you to consider a rebrand. Stagnation, your current brand and strategy is failing. It's falling on deaf ears. Maybe it's just outdated. Maybe you're falling flat because everyone else in the industry looks just like you and you're not differentiating. And then on the external event side, these are things that happen that are often beyond our control, like a merger or something happens where you're dealing with bad press and you need to revamp your image. These are all good reasons to consider a rebrand, but you don't have to. So on a refresh, next slide, Matt. So all around, I mean, you're going to keep your brand the same here. Your goal is not to completely remake your brand, but it is to give yourself a visual lift, possibly a verbal lift, depending on which bucket you're facing challenges within. But in visual obstacles, hey, maybe your last logo wasn't flexible for all the channels you're chasing today. Maybe you have some inconsistency within your visual or verbal identity that you need to tighten up and create some new guidelines around. Perhaps you're expanding in a way that makes sense to retain your brand and just give it a little bit of a refresh. Or your messaging isn't working anymore because your market has evolved. And then my favorite of these three is death by Pinterest. We're all consuming the same sources of imagery and inspiration. And so you end up regurgitating a lot of the things that everyone else is doing. But what that does is leads to a lack of differentiation between you and your competition. And you just get a little too trendy and you lose the essence of what you are. Next slide. So Acton about 2 years ago did a refresh, and the primary driver for us was that we had a lack of alignment between our product and marketing design teams. The marketing team was going in this busy, playful, approachable direction, but the product design team was going with more of a clean, confident, usable, approachable direction. And so we needed to tighten this up and present as a cohesive unit across the company. Next slide. So before, we were this maybe a little more carefree, free-spirited style. And even within our style on the marketing side of things, we had a little bit of a control problem with how we managed our brand. So even within this, you can see that we've got some different sub-brands happening and evolving and coming out of this. But we took this and we matured it and tried to bring it into alignment with the product. Next slide. So what we did here is we retained our logo colors and a lot of the shapes that we've been using before, but we made it more clean, confident, and bold to be the marketing arm of what our product is about. We killed that old style of marketing illustration, and we adopted product design's illustration style to bring that in to the front-facing customer side of things. And the other thing that we chose to do here is change the way that we use color. So before we were using color everywhere in a way that was chaotic and overwhelming, to using it more sparingly in a way that draws attention to things that we want people to look at, and using it more functionally as a little garnish on our designs instead of the whole meal. Next slide. So how can you do this for yourself? This is by far the best tip that you could use to evaluate whether or not you need to do a refresh. Grab your brand guidelines. First of all, if you don't have brand guidelines, that might be a reason to do a refresh, because you need to have something that's guiding everyone across the organization to maintain consistency and communicate in the same way. But grab all of your branded materials that you can find, one pagers, website, event booths, video, and go find a conference room or a Miro board and pin it all up next to each other. And pretty quickly, you're going to be able to see whether or not you're communicating in a consistent visual manner across all of those things. Matt's kind of already covered the verbal side with content, but the visual side has to be there too, because that's the first thing that people are evaluating. By putting it all up together, it's going to help you quickly evaluate this, and also lead you to the next slide, which is, really reflecting on this material and asking yourself some questions about, is it consistently presented? Is it scaling well across social media and events and website and videos? Or do you need to make some changes so that it scales better? Is it just outdated? Is it a 30-year-old brand that hasn't reached that level of iconic family brand style status? Or is it just old and it needs updated to be a little more current? And I would say the most important part of this section is, yes, it's important to have your reflections, but if you don't document your takeaways and figure out where you want to improve, then you're never going to be able to get buy-in from the stakeholders that matter to make this process successful, because ultimately you're going to need a champion here to undertake even something as simple as a refresh. Next slide, please. And then lastly, this is just another tip and trick to figure out if you should do this. Audit your competitor brands. I mean, you're going to gain a lot from this other than whether or not you should do a refresh. You might discover that you understand more deeply about what your competitor is about and where you win after doing this process. But it's also going to teach you whether you're suffering from the lack of differentiation, and it's going to help you identify that. But additionally, if you're already committed to this refresh process, it's going to help you make decisions that further differentiate yourself and make yourself stand out in this market. Last slide. Should you hire an agency? This is always a hot topic. Should you do it in-house? Should you use an agency? Maybe. I mean, there is no straightforward answer here. It's going to be case by case, depending on your unique situation. But these are some main things that you can identify and help you decide where you should be going. But I think the primary thing that we need to be keeping in mind when we're working with agencies is the good, fast, cheap triangle. If you want it to be good and cheap, it's not going to be fast. And if you want it to be fast and good, it's not going to be cheap. And go into it with good expectations if you're going to engage with an agency. Be very strong in what you should be expecting out of this and what you want from them, because the more clearly you can articulate your end goal, the more successful everyone involved in this situation will be. And that's what I've got.
Great job, you guys. Good stuff. We are just about at time, but we did have some questions. If you guys want to help answer those before we sign off real quick. Alicia was asking, Matt, what's your advice for old blogs? Do you archive them after a while, or do you try to continually update them? What do you think works best?
The short answer is yes. The longer answer is, yeah, I recommend updating the ones that you think can still give you some value. And what I do, to be specific, you know, I will update the content, the visuals, whatever, give it a fresh publication date. So make it, you know, it appears to be a new post for all intents and purposes, and do it that way. You know, I think the thing that we, you know, as a channel manager of a blog, I understand the anxiety of like, oh, there's so many blogs and, you know, they're not all like, you know, up to my expectations. I think sure you can retire and redirect the ones that you think are really hurting you. But it's also okay to have, you know, some old blogs on there. It's not going to necessarily hurt you too much. But I would say another tip is, and something that we found in our audit is that in some cases we found that, like, you know, I mentioned the eras of like different marketing teams. We would have the same topic from like each of those, right? And so what I'd like to do with those is consolidate into one, right? Redirect all the different ones into that new one that I'm making. In some cases, I can pull content from different ones, you know, like different teams had different, you know, good ideas to include, and approach it that way. So I think those are my thoughts there.
Great. And then just one more question really quick. When it came to your audit, you mentioned pulling some metrics in from Google Analytics. Are there any other places that you would recommend looking at to see if those pieces were productive or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on exactly what you're looking for, but definitely, I think some other ones to look for, specifically if we're talking about blogs and SEO, any of your tools like SEMrush, Moz, whatever, Ahrefs, whatever you use for, you know, your keyword research and sort of metrics there. Keeping in mind that that's third-party data, and so it might not always quite exactly line up. And then another good one is actually, I think, in ways more useful than analytics. Google Search Console will give you the incoming clicks for your keywords and your pages, and recommend that one. You know, GA4, I don't love it. So if you you know, have the budget to get, you know, another paid analytics service, I would recommend that as well, because GA4 has issues. It's not always the best. Sorry, Google.
They're gonna hear you. Okay, great. That is all the time we have today. Thank you all for joining us. Again, brief reminder that there will be a survey at the end. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know how you enjoyed this presentation. And until next time, we will see you back here for another Act On webinar, hopefully. And have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, y'all.